Hello everybody and welcome to this Weidmann presentation in September 2025. Today we're going to talk about the science of transformer aging, and I'm joined by my two colleagues in Rapperswil, Switzerland, Lars Dreyer on the right, hi Lars, and Thierry Koenig on the left in the blue shirt. Both Lars and Thierry work in our R&D center in Rapperswil. Lars is the head of the test labs there, and Thierry works with Lars as one of our leading test and development engineers. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Lars, who will start the presentation and webinar today. Lars, over to you and enjoy. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Francis, for the introduction. So Thierry and I, we divided this presentation into two parts. First, I will start with the theory, basics and challenges of aging experiments. And the second part will be by Thierry about the results of aging experiments we conducted earlier. What about the theory and basics of aging experiments? So the aging chemistry are the following. So we have here on the top, we have a representation of the cellulose molecule, and we have three different paths for the aging that can happen. Here on the left, we have hydrolysis, means we need water for that. The water will react and it will lead to a chain scission, so a cracking here of this cellulose molecule. The second pathway for aging is the so-called pyrolysis. Means that we have the aging mainly by higher temperatures. It will lead also to a chain scission, and to get smaller parts of the cellulose molecule. The third part is oxidation. As the name says, it requires oxygen. We have here some groups that can be oxidized. What you will get at the end are aldehydes, ketones, and at the end a full cleavage of the ring here. The first name that is dropped when it comes to aging chemistry or reactivity kinetics is Svante Arrhenius. Swedish man, born about 150 years ago. He was Nobel Prize winner in 1903, and his main interests were kinetics, electrolytic dissociation, metrology. So he was one of the first men that mentioned the greenhouse effect already more than 100 years ago. He also studied physiology and cosmology. What was his main achievement? So it is the so-called Arrhenius equation. The Arrhenius equation describes how fast a chemical reaction happens. Aging of cellulose is also a chemical reaction, and we can describe this very nicely with this equation here. So we have here K, which is the velocity of how fast this reaction happens. We have EA, the activation energy, means this is the first energy that you have to put into the system that the reaction will happen. Then we have the so-called pre-exponential factor A, that is a measure of the probability that the reaction will happen, means that the probability that two molecules come together and react with each other. We have R and T, R which is the universal gas constant, and T the temperature. We can now draw this formula in a plot. So when we use here on the y-axis the logarithmic scale of k, and on the x-axis we have 1 divided by the temperature, you see that we will get from this formula a linear line here, which makes it very easy to calculate reaction times for different temperatures. And we use this formula then to analyze these aging experiments that we did and also do in our lab. How can the aging of an insulation material be measured? So we have different properties that we can determine in the lab. We have the so-called degree of polymerization, or dP. It is a measure of how long the cellulose chain is. It is sampling of the material is quite easy because we only need very small sample sizes. So even in a transformer, if some insulation is accessible, you can take a sample and measure the dP. We have other properties, mechanical properties, like tensile strength and elongation, burst strength or tear strength. There we need physically intact samples to get really a meaningful test result. So if we have warping, folding, cuts on the sample, that might impact then the result. And the other drawback of this property is that large samples are needed. So for a tensile strength, we need a paper strip of about 10 centimeters length. Since the degree of polymerization is quite easy to measure, this has been the property of choice for estimating an aging of a cellulose molecule. So the cellulosic insulation is made by cellulose fibers, which consist of cellulose molecules. The cellulose molecule is a chain molecule consisting of several identical single units. And the degree of polymerization is a measure for how many of these single units are forming this long chain. So for example, when we have a degree of polymerization of 1200, then we have 1200 units that form the cellulose molecule. It is a measure for the molecule length, but not for the fiber length. So there is no correlation between dP and fiber length. These are different pairs of shoes. When we have now a new insulation with a dP of about 1200 and the transformer is installed into the net, the degree of polymerization is decreasing over time since the insulation sees temperature, sees hydrogen, sees water, what you have mentioned before. At a certain time, the paper gets brittle and at the end, it will completely decompose. What is now the correlation between the degree of polymerization and, for example, retained tensile strength? We see that at the beginning, the degree of polymerization goes down, but the retained tensile strength will still remain at the high level, but then suddenly drops. Usually, end of life of insulation material is at a dP of about 200, which is at about 50% of retained tensile strength. We also have other correlations between dP and other properties. So again, here tensile strength, burst strength, but also elongation. At the end, what really matters in the transformer is the mechanical property, because when you have windings that move, the elongation or tensile strength is required. EP is just correlated via to this other properties via these graphs here. Aging experiments are done according to standards. We have two different standards. We have the IEEE standard and an IEC standards that are quite similar, but there are main differences. One difference is the industry-proven system that is used as a reference system. So in the IEEE world, we have thermally upgraded kraft, TUK, and in IEC, we have standard graph paper. We have differences in the liquid to solid ratio, in the aging temperatures. We also have differences in aging times and for the end-of-life criteria. Differences are not that big, but there are differences, and due to this, we can also expect differences in the final result of the aging experiments. When we perform aging experiments in the lab, we require a lot of resources. So due to the fact that we have to perform the aging experiment at different temperatures, it means that we need a lot of aging vessels. We need to prepare the paper, the core steel, the oil. Everything has to be dried and at the end tested at different times for the aging experiment. Therefore, these aging experiments are also not done as standard tests. It is more like a type testing that we perform. Here are some important factors that may influence the result of an aging experiment. So it is one thing is the choice of aging test vessels. We can either do it in these glass tubes or in the steel tubes or steel vessels. We have them. One is not equipped with a pressure relief system, one is, so this can of course influence the result. Temperatures that are chosen can have an impact on the result, and also which property that you choose for evaluation of the status or of the aging status of the insulation. At the end, what you calculate is a relative temperature index. And the choice of the reference system, this industry-proven system, is depending on the standard that you use. As I mentioned already before, in IEC it is a standard kraft paper. In IEEE it is a thermally upgraded paper, which contains dicyandiamide, and depending on the amount of this chemical, the aging is different, which means you can also then have differences in the temperature index that you calculate at the end of the aging experiment. Therefore, it's very important that standards are followed and that you also indicate what you have used. How is the analysis done of an aging experiment? So after measuring all these different temperatures, here we have 3 different temperatures and different times, we get these numbers here of the retained tensile strengths. Here we select, for example, 55% as an end-of-life criteria. And then here at 155 degrees, this means this 55% are reached after about 500 hours. For 140 degrees, it is 1500 hours, and for 125 degrees, it is approximately 7000 hours. These temperatures and the according times are now used and put into this Arrhenius plot. And at the end, what we get and what was also used by Arrhenius is this linear plot here. So we have 3 different temperatures with according times in a logarithmic scale, and we can extrapolate now from this 7000 hours that we have used to a transformer lifetime, which was here chosen as 150,000 hours, or about 70 years. And you can go down then to the x-axis and see what temperature this means, which is now, in this example, it is 98 degrees. One challenge here is really that these points here have to be accurate, because you're extrapolating to much longer times. What happens if this point here, for example, was not here, but a little bit down? You see that the slope of this curve here changes, and then the error up here can be quite significant. Therefore, it's important that everything is verified and no failures are made. Another challenge is the choice of this of the test. So we have 2 different types of tests that are described in the standard. One is a sealed tube test, which is easy to do. The whole system here is at the same temperature. You have no temperature gradients. On the other side, we have the so-called dual temperature test, which is more closer to what is in a transformer. So we have here, very quickly described, we have here 2 conductors that are wrapped with paper, and they are heated. So they are at one temperature, and the other temperature is then the surrounding oil, and also here a bulk pressboard. So we have here 2 temperatures. We have a gradient in the temperature, and due to this we have also a distribution of the water, but also acids, for example, are distributed differently here in this system. What happens, for example, with the water? So we have here the hotspot. The water will migrate to the cooler pressboard here at the edge, and the hotspot is in this system always dry. At the end, if no water is there is also no water for the hydrolysis of the insulation, and at the end a slower aging. So we have, this is easier to do in the lab, and this is more reflecting what happens in a transformer. But these dual temperature test cells are also quite expensive, and they are expensive to maintain, to control the temperature. So it's a much more complex system. This is a practical example what you can do with these Arrhenius equations or the aging. Let's assume that you have a fleet of transformers, very similar transformers, and one of them broke down, so you have to dismantle it. What you can do is you can take samples here in the winding at different positions. You can measure the degree of polymerization and estimate the aging of your insulation. You can go then into this graph, which was made by reformulation of the Arrhenius equation. Let's assume that you measure a dP of 600 at your insulation. You calculate with an end-of-life criteria of 200. So you go up here at 600 to the green curve. And what you get is that your relative lifetime or remaining lifetime of the transformer is still 80%. For me personally, I think that's a very easy analysis. It's quite a cheap analysis, and what it helps is really to estimate afterwards the aging of the rest of your fleet in your network. So that was the theory, and now I hand over to Thierry, which will tell you more about practical examples.
So thank you, Lars, for this first part, and highlighting all the aspects which need to be taken into consideration when we perform aging experiments. So we went back through some experiments we've done in the past. And we choose some of these experiments to present here. The first I want to present is an aging experiment with alternative liquids. In this experiment, we used 4 types of vegetable-based natural ester to compare, then 1 synthetic ester, and 4 types of mineral oils. Then, in all that aging test vessels were also some pressboard in it to see what is the impact on the cellulose material. These aging experiments were performed at different temperatures and also in closed and open system to see the impact here. We applied heating cycles with cooling and heating phases. For the evaluation, we evaluated on the insulation liquids, the water content, the electric strength, and acidity content. And for the pressboard, water content, tensile strength, and the degree of polymerization. So the first results I want to look at are regarding the insulation liquids. And here we see the water content from this experiment. It's a bar diagram, and in green, you can see the vegetable natural esters. In orange is the synthetic ester, and in the blue are the 4 types of mineral oil. We have always taken an initial value before the test was started. In here we can see the 2 open and closed system, and both were at 120 degrees, and in here the closed system at 135 and at 150 degrees. When we compare now the 120 degrees open system to the 120 degrees closed system regarding the water content, we can see here the water content in the mineral oil in the open system does not has a big change here, but in the closed system we can see here an increase towards the end of the test. So in this open system, the water content or the water somehow disappeared over this experiment. For the water content in the ester liquids, there can hardly be seen an impact, but here in the 135 degrees closed system and in 150 degrees closed system, we see here the initial or the first moment the water content in the esters increased, and after that it starts to decrease. Also here, more in extreme at 150 degrees, it is higher in the beginning, and after that we see a decrease. The mineral oil in the closed system also here increased over time. When we have a closer look at the 135 degrees closed system, what happens here? We can see we have an increase from the synthetic ester and the vegetable-based ester, and from a certain point we see this hydrolysis effect starts. So we have from this moment a decrease in the water content of these ester-based liquids, and in the mineral oil the water content is increasing over time. When you have a look on the acid number in the insulation liquids, we can see here in the open and closed system in comparison. In the open system, we can hardly see an impact. Only the one rapeseed oil has here an increase, but it already has quite a higher value from the beginning. In the closed system, we can see here an increase nearly at the end of this experiment, that the acid number is increased in the ester liquids. This can be more extremely be seen at the 135 degrees closed system and also in the 150 degrees closed system. And this effect here of this increase of this acid number is generated, caused by this hydrolysis chemical process. Now we take a look on the solid insulation, what happens to the degree of polymerization in this experiment. The initial value was quite high, and then in all test vessels, we have a first decrease of the degree of polymerization. We can compare the 4 months in the open system to the 6 months, and in closed system, we can see here they're quite on the same level. What we can see, but then in the closed system, is then we have a decrease, a higher decrease of the degree of polymerization in the pressboard, which is aged in mineral oil. And also, this can also be seen here on the 135 degrees closed system and in 150 degrees closed system. This is also caused by the higher water content in the mineral oil. As Lars already mentioned, the tensile strength can be correlated to the degree of polymerization. So also this effect of higher deterioration of the pressboard aged in this closed system, we can see here this has a lower or a faster decrease than at the end, caused by the higher water content in the mineral oil. The water content in the pressboard itself, here also in the open system, there can hardly be seen any effect, but here in the closed system, the water cannot disappear. So we see here an increase of the water content in the pressboard in this closed system, and also here the 135 and 150 degree system. Only the water content in the pressboard is increased, which is aged in mineral oil. So the conclusion out of this experiment, in the ester liquids, the water reaction slowed the aging over time. It was depending on the temperature. In the closed system, the ester liquids consumed the water through this hydrolysis, especially at higher temperatures, and reduced the cellulose deterioration. The ester hydrolysis, on the other hand, produced these long-chain fatty acids, but it was not any accelerated pressboard aging observed in this experiment due to this acidity content, and also no effect of this acid number on the electric strength of the mineral oil of the liquids. Yeah. The electric strength of the insulation liquids was mainly influenced by the water content. And in this experiment, we analyzed 4 types of mineral oil. So 4 types of quality, and we could not really observe an effect on the aging rate. The pressboard aged in the beginning at the same rate in both ester and in mineral oil, but then again caused by this hydrolysis effect, that the aging was a little bit reduced in the ester liquids. The water content in the pressboard can be well correlated to the water content in the insulation liquids, and the dielectric properties of the pressboard are also mainly influenced by the water content, and that could be observed by the conductivity measurements of the pressboard. This experiment is also published in a paper from our side named Aging of Pressboard in Different Insulation Liquids. The next experiment I want to present is about laminated materials. So a past study revealed that aging of laminated wood generates a higher acid content and higher water. Therefore, an additional experiment was developed to analyze what is the impact when we age multiple materials in the same vessel, and have then focused on what happens to the paper in that test vessel. So for that, we used 4 types of test vessels, and in it we have multiple material like kraft paper, low density board, high density board, and also copper and steel. The only difference between these 4 test vessels is in one we have only high density board, so no laminated material. In one we have casein laminated material, one polyester, and in one laminated wood. We also then applied to these test vessels an aging with at 125 degrees and 140 degrees and 155 to see what is the impact here on the paper insulation. Here are the results of the DP of the paper, which was aged together in green without any laminated material. In red, we can see the aging together with the casein laminated material. In blue, the one with polyester, and in purple, the one with laminated wood. And we can see here the degree of polymerization is always the DP of the paper is already at the first measurement lower compared to the aging together with all other materials. So the aging of the paper was faster when it was aged together with laminated wood, and that could be seen on all temperatures. Then the retained tensile strength, what does that mean here? Here we also can see the same effect. The retained tensile strength is lower when the paper is aged together with laminated wood. Now we take these values and plot it here into this in this curve to look at the end of life condition of the paper. So we take an end of life criteria of DP200. We put in when this value was reached at 155 degrees and 140 degrees and 125 degrees. And then, as Lars mentioned, we can extrapolate this curve down to a certain lifetime, or to say at a certain temperature, to see how is the impact of the lifetime when it was aged together in this. The paper is aged together with this laminated material. And we can see here that the lifetime of the paper is shorter, so when it was aged together with laminated wood. When you take an end-of-life criteria of a tensile retention of 55%, we can also then plot in here the points when this was measured, extrapolate this curve down to lower temperature, and see also here the lifetime of this paper is reduced up to 60% when it is aged together with laminated wood. So the conclusion out of this investigation is the laminator pressboard better prevents the transformer paper insulation compared to laminated wood. the aging effect. So plywood has acceleration on the paper degradation. Then the lifespan, we have an impact here when we use plywood instead of pressboard material. So therefore, the recommendation is to use laminated pressboard to have a longer lifetime of the transformer. Also here, this investigation about laminated material and aging is presented in these two papers. What did we not cover so far, but I like to mention here is what happens to the dielectric properties when we do an aging experiment. So for this, I picked some experiments and plotted or bring it together here to understand what happens to the dielectric strength of pressboard and paper and also on the loss factor. First, we have a look on the loss factor. In here, transformer board with a high density transformer board and low density transformer board was aged at 90 degrees, at 105 and 120 and 135 degrees. So we see when it is aged at lower temperatures, we can hardly see any influence, but when it's aged at higher temperatures, there is a strong increase of the loss factor. And this is mainly caused by the water content in the pressboard caused by this aging. To verify this, that this effect comes from the water content, we aged some K-buff material at 120 degrees. Then we took that after this aging and dried in the oven, oil impregnated again, and then checked the dissipation factor of this aged material. We can see here that the DP value is reduced because we aged up to 1,100 days. At the end, we reached nearly 200, nearly a DP of 200, and the dissipation factor is still below 0.4%. So we could verify here that the aging, the DP value has no effect on the dissipation factor. It only comes from the water content. What about the dielectric strength? So in this experiment, we applied impulse voltage on aged transformer board. We could not really observe here an impact on the dielectric strength of this material. Again, we aged K-buff at 120 degrees. Then we dried the K-buff after the aging experiment to also verify that the DP value has no effect on the dielectric strength of the aged paper. And also here, we reached the same values at DP 200 of the dielectric strength as we have in the beginning. But that does not mean that water has no impact on the dielectric strength. It has an impact. This is shown in another paper from our side. We can see here we cut out of a 8mm board 10mm samples, tested it under a step-by-step test with 1-minute steps, and could see here after when you have a higher the higher the water content in the sample is, we have a higher spread of the breakdown strength, and between 3 and 4% we have a strong decrease of the dielectric strength of the pressboard. So we can say the transformer board ages, the loss factor tends to increase, but it is due to the water content in the material. The transformer board has still quite a good dielectric strength. There is a high water content needed to reduce the breakdown strength. So the paper and the pressboard itself controls the effects of the aging and prevents the dielectric properties. But the dielectric strength or the breakdown strength is mainly influenced by the water content. So these are a few experiments from our side. And with this, we are at the end of our presentation. So thank you very much for listening. And here is our contact email address from Lars and myself. And if you have any further questions or comments, you can reach us out over this email address, and we try to answer all your questions about aging. Thank you very much.
Thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye.